Welcome back. America's ambassador to the United Nations has called for the UN Security Council to take action to protect human rights. Nikki Haley warned that if the body fails to address the issue, it could, quote, escalate into real threats to international peace. But other members of the Security Council say the initiative could be used to exercise power over countries and lead to the further politicalization of the UN.
When a state begins to systematically violate human rights, it is a sign. It is a red flag. It's a blaring siren, one of the clearest possible indicators that instability and violence may follow and spill across borders. It is no surprise that the world's most brutal regimes are also the most ruthless violators of human rights. If this council fails to take human rights violations and abuses seriously, they can escalate into real threats to international peace and security.
This is a body with unique decision-making powers. That includes the use of force in situations that threaten peace, violate peace, or against an act of aggression. We can't agree with the assertion in the preparation notes for this meeting, in which it said human rights violations and abuses should be seen as an issue that falls within the Security Council's primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security. The Security Council has its powers given to it only by its member states. When it attempts to go beyond these powers, it impedes those states and other UN bodies. Each of those parties have their own roles and objectives in this system.
Well, Human Rights Watch has also highlighted that Washington fails to address abuses committed by its allies like Saudi Arabia and Iraq. With more on what transpired at the Security Council meeting, here is Caleb Marpin.
Both Egypt and Russia voiced concerns about what Nikki Haley had said. They seemed to be concerned about the fact that human rights could be used as a pretext for interventions around the world. The Russian envoy specifically talked about how human rights should not be used as a political weapon.
We share the views and fears that have been expressed by those who are concerned about the inclusion of human rights on the Security Council agenda, and how that might be seen as an instrument to exercise power over certain countries.
Egypt is also concerned that some insist on using the common goal of human rights promotion as a backdoor to interfere in the internal affairs of a state.
Now, it's important to note that China has put out a human rights report on the United States and pointed out that there are many violations of human rights that take place within the USA. And while the United States frequently criticizes other countries around the world for allegedly violating human rights, the United States itself does not have a perfect record. Now, it's also important to note that in Nikki Haley's comments, while she criticized many different countries around the world for allegedly violating human rights, Nikki Haley did not mention the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is known to be violating human rights in many different aspects. This is the only country in the world that still practices beheading as a method for execution. The country routinely executes people for crimes like sorcery, crimes like insulting the king. The country remains an absolute monarchy with very little right to free expression or freedom of the press or dissent for the population. Regardless of that fact, Nikki Haley didn't seem to mention them and criticize them for human rights. Furthermore, she didn't mention the fact that they are currently conducting an attack on Yemen, and that the bombing of Yemen by Saudi Arabia has been widely decried by international human rights observers. Now, it's important to note that despite Saudi Arabia's reputation for violating human rights both within the country and elsewhere, the country was actually elected in 2015 to a key position within the UN Human Rights Council.
Meanwhile, the story that has been dominating many headlines is that of a possible military confrontation between Washington and Pyongyang.
What's the biggest threat to stability on the Korean Peninsula? Kim Jong-un's nuclear program or Trump's armada of warships off the North Korean coast? Chances are you've probably been having this rammed down your eye holes recently.
Military options for North Korea.
The possibility of military action
between the U.S. and North Korea.
Sources say they include placing nuclear weapons in South Korea or killing Kim Jong-un.
But when was the last time the DPRK mounted a major military offensive since the 1950s? I'll give you a clue. The US, on the other hand...
Came, you saw, you died.
Do I really need to go into all of that? The last time the North was attacked by the US, the losses they suffered were staggering. As US Air Force General Curtis LeMay put it, over a period of 3 years or so, we killed off, what, 20% of the population? 20% of the population. During World War II, the US lost 1/3 of 1% of its population. With the US's pathological love of regime change, can the DPRK really be blamed for thinking that they need to arm up? Especially with mass US military deployment in South Korea. Now, I'll admit, there is a lot wrong with North Korea. Like Saudi Arabia, it's run by a brutally oppressive dynasty. Only the US isn't on the verge of destroying Saudi Arabia because apparently, well, Saudi Arabia is the good kind of oppressive dynasty. But North Korea has been willing to compromise. According to former US President Jimmy Carter, the DPRK has sent a consistent message that it is ready to conclude an agreement to end its nuclear program and conclude a permanent peace treaty. The increasingly heated rhetoric that we see coming out of North Korea is an inevitable reaction to US military provocations, crippling sanctions, and Washington's refusal of direct talks with Pyongyang. So, do we need another human tragedy, or does the US need to chill out and back off in a big way?